Hello, amazing people. It's time for another hot lap. Buckle up, get your helmet, and let's go for a ride. This week, we're going to be diving into the worlds of Formula One and NASCAR as we take a look at the Australian Grand Prix and all the events that happened within and around it, and the NASCAR race that was quite unique and took place around the circuit of the Americas. Very unique because it is not on an oval. The Australian Grand Prix I had to not watch live because it was at midnight, and that would be a little bit insane for me to stay up that late when I have to work the next day. So I actually went ahead and watched it this morning, and can I say I did miss out a little bit for not watching it live, obviously. So without further ado, we're going to start off this episode with some Formula One. Let's get right into it. All right, taking a look into Formula One, we got some pre-race news to go over. We have Alexander Albon binning his car, the Williams, in one of the free practices. I can't remember exactly which one. I think it was FP3. And he had so much damage to his car, to the chassis, and Williams doesn't have the fundage to get a replacement, by my understanding. So they decided to give Logan Sargent's car. Alex's birthday was on the 23rd, so that was a little birthday present from Williams and Logan. It's to go ahead and let Alex Albon race. This decision meant that Sargent would not be racing in this weekend's Grand Prix, and Williams would start with only one car on the grid, of course due to the other one being damaged and Williams not having a replacement chassis for it. The decision to let Alex race instead of Logan was one that I understand came down to the fact that in the previous races from this year, the finishing potential has been a lot higher for Alex Albon than Logan Sargent. And since Williams had to place all of their eggs in one basket, Alex Albon statistically had a higher chance of scoring better points throughout the race. So they decided to go ahead and give Alex the seat. Was this appropriate? I would say it really did just come down to what the team had to place all their eggs in their basket for. You know, they really had to gamble whether it was one driver or another. And at the end of the day, if you're the team principal and you have to make that decision, you would ask Logan to step out of the car and let Alex race, just because of the chances of you scoring points are so much higher when you have that, I don't want to say better driver, but perhaps like a driver who is a little bit more in form right now. Maybe he is a better driver. Maybe some of you think that Logan Sargent doesn't even deserve to be in the Williams anymore. I don't believe that way. I believe he earned his way into Formula One, as every other driver has. Of course, there's money involved. Like every driver who's in Formula One has paid some sort of fundage or brought some sort of sponsors to a team. Logan Sargent, I don't really believe is seen to be as one of those, as much as somebody like Lance Stroll or Nikita Mazepin when he was racing, or Sergio Perez. It feels like Logan maybe earned it a little bit more than others. That could be a little bit of bias from me, but I don't really believe I'm biased towards any of them. If anything, I like Alex a little bit more than I do Logan currently. But anyways, that was a decision that the Williams had to come down to, and I think at the end of the day, me and the team principal made a very similar decision based off of what should have happened. Other news, we have Sainz returning from a successful appendix operation. Of course, last race we saw Oliver Bearman absolutely tear up the field in Saudi Arabia, doing very, very well on his very impressive debut, stepping in for Carlos Sainz. But we do have Sainz returning to the grid after becoming a little bit lighter, getting his appendix removed. That'll come into play later on. Ferrari were looking to have great race pace throughout the practice sessions. Red Bull did just eke them out in qualifying, but I don't think that either of them looked really bad. Red Bull definitely looked a little bit closer to the field versus the miles ahead that they have been in previous sessions, but, you know, it didn't really come to fruition for them, let's say. And that was all the notes I had for pre-race, so we're going to go ahead and cover some of the details that went on in the race. Now, we have Max Verstappen leading from Sainz and Norris right off the gun. They all just kind of kept their order. They fell into line through the first couple corners. Russell and Perez were battling from the very start. A really good start for Russell. Went ahead and jumped ahead of Sergio Perez early on in the race. On lap 2, we see Max Verstappen have a horrible, horrible first sector. I believe he was 1 second off of the pace of Charles Leclerc and like 0.6 of a second off the pace of Carlos Sainz, which is very, very detrimental to a race. We see him making simple errors and easy mistakes, and Sainz ended up overtaking Max Verstappen in the turn 9-10 sequence that is on Albert Park. It's a really quick, like left-right, and we saw Sainz overtake right before that. It was then that we thought that maybe Max's car was having some issues. He dropped back from Carlos on lap 3, and eventually the car ended up kind of giving out on him. We saw some smoke coming off of the rear right of Max's car. It ended up causing him to DNF on lap 4. It was caused by a binding of the rear brake, which basically means that the rear brake, since the very start of the race, was locked up, and it felt to Verstappen, as he described it, as somebody just always holding a handbrake on the right hand side of the car. Ended up causing a retirement because, yes, it was binding at the start, but then all that friction and all that heat eventually caused it to light on fire, which caused him to go into the box. Ended up retiring the car. He was not able to come back out. On lap 6, after Verstappen's retirement, all the teams, a little bit more moraled up. Sergio Perez dropped back to P7 right off the start. Our top 4 were Carlos Sainz was in first, Lando Norris was in second, Charles Leclerc was in third, and Oscar Piastri was in fourth. They were all fighting for the win at this point, as I said before, as Verstappen was forced to retire, so all the teams saw their opportunity to fight this race. Perez was staying out a little bit too long during his first stint. He was out around lap 14 after a lot of people had boxed due to the higher tire degradation than was expected at Albert Park when compared to the results of last year or the year before. Just all the telemetry data that they had, the tires were falling off a lot faster. Sergio Perez stayed out through lap 14, box lap 15. It killed his chance to fight up the field as he was falling backwards in positioning, backwards in timing, and his tires were degrading. Lando Norris and Perez both boxed on lap 15, however. On lap 17, Lewis Hamilton had a DNF. His car shut down. I can't exactly remember the cause, but I do remember he pulled off the road safely, so it wasn't like an incident, like a racing incident, a wreck with another driver or anything. It was a failure from his vehicle. That brought out a virtual safety car right after the first tire, like the first stint was over, basically, so it didn't really have a huge effect on the race. It didn't cause any strategies to change, maybe pushed the next pit stop back a lap or two. After green flag racing resumed from Lewis Hamilton's incident, the 2 Ferraris were leading, followed by the McLarens. So that is interesting how Leclerc was able to undercut Lando Norris. As we talked about Sergio Perez falling back, Lando Norris did the same and ended up falling back, having an unsuccessful overcut on Charles Leclerc. Leclerc, of course, having a successful undercut in their strategies this race. Sergio Perez on lap 21 ended up passing George Russell. This put Russell and Alonso together, moving Sergio Perez up to, I believe it was P5. Yes, Perez was up to 5th on, it moved him up to P6, so then Perez was up to 5th place on lap 28. That was when he passed Alonso to put Russell and Alonso together. After lap 28, we went through kind of the middle phase of the race, the middle of the middle stint, which is very, very boring. We saw everybody box, get their new tires, and then by the end of the race, on lap 58, the very final lap, George Russell crashed after a long, I think it was like a 5 or 6 lap battle with Fernando Alonso. George Russell was following Alonso, again, to turns 9 and 10, I believe, or exiting turn 9 and 10. And he hit the outside wall and turned, and his car slid into the middle of the track on its side. This came down to Alonso getting a 20-second time penalty. Alonso stating that he was simply lifting off early into the corner, and so he could get more traction and a better exit out of the corner. But what had actually happened was after This is a quote from motorsports.com, an article that I read. You can find the link down in the description. It says, after considering the evidence and the explanation from Alonso, the Spaniard was handed a drive-through for potentially dangerous driving, which was converted to a 20-second penalty post-race. That 20-second penalty post-race was because he didn't actually have time to serve it on the track, and it automatically becomes 20 seconds if you don't serve your drive-through penalty by the end of the race. I believe you get DNF'd if you don't do it within 3 laps, but if there's not 3 laps left in the race, then it becomes 20 seconds because you didn't have time to serve the penalty. The penalty dropped him from 6th to 8th in the final results and promoted his teammate Lance Stroll as well as Yuki Tsunoda from Racing Bulls to 7th. It promoted Lance Stroll to 6th, Yuki Tsunoda to 7th. The telemetry data that was analyzed by the FIA in order to induce this penalty showed that Alonso had lifted 100 meters earlier than usual and tapped the brakes. The steward deemed that he slowed down to an extraordinary extent, more than reasonable to optimize his corner exit. So, cheeky little move there from Alonso, ended up not getting away with it just due to all the data and all the sensors that they have. 100 meters early is quite, that is a big difference. If you're braking 200 meters before a corner versus 100, and the driver behind you is definitely not expecting it, evasive actions will have to be taken place, and it could be seen as dangerous driving, which it quite honestly was. George Russell reminded us of how dangerous the sport is as he laid on the side of his car in the middle of the track, continuously and quite frantically, honestly, calling for a red flag over the radio. You could hear the fear in his voice, and it was a little bit unsettling. It definitely got people on the edge of their seat when they heard him calling and how frantic he was to get a red flag out for his own safety, because he was laying, and the way that his car was, he was laying so that the bottom of his car was facing where oncoming traffic would be, so he wouldn't be able to see if a driver was coming because it would hit the bottom of his car and not the top. Luckily, there was some very, very heavy cautions that were put out very quickly, and George Russell was safe and able to get out of his car, so he was all good. That was the race. Some notes I took from the race were George Russell's crash, which we just talked about, and Sainz versus Verstappen and what could have been. I believe that Verstappen would have won the race. Do I know by how much? Of course not. I do think it would have been a good battle just because of the pace that we saw out of Sergio Perez, and he himself had something to say about this after the race. Sergio Perez states, I think just as a team, we didn't have the pace today. We didn't have the pace throughout the weekend. We were struggling already from Friday and never got on top of the management of tires. Perez himself finished 5th after struggling to move up the field from 6th on the grid and believes circuits where the front tires are put under more stress than the rears, like Albert Park, are a weak spot for the Milton Keynes outfit. Milton Keynes outfit being the Red Bull car because they're stationed in Milton Keynes. I do believe that was a struggle. I do believe Max Verstappen would have been able to deal with it, and he definitely would have won this race just because of how strong he started. You got to think his rear right tire had brakes on it for the whole time that he was racing, and he held the lead all the way to the middle of lap 2. So that's very, very impressive, and honestly kind of underrated how much people aren't focusing on that, because that is quite the feat to be able to hold people off and still race while your back right tire just constantly is under pressure from a brake. McLaren team orders came into play during the Grand Prix. They swapped Lando for Oscar Piastri. This was with very good reason, and I absolutely agree with their decision. It was in order to try and overcut Leclerc because Leclerc had very old tires and Lando's tires were very, very fresh. So to swap Lando and Piastri to let Lando in front was the right move, as he could run away a little bit quicker and try to catch up to those old tires and the old car in front of him who was struggling. Our top 10 for the Upside Down Grand Prix. We have Sainz, Leclerc, Norris, Piastri, Perez, Stroll, Tsunoda, Alonso, Hülkenberg, and Magnussen. Very, very good and underrated performance from the Haas this weekend, having both of their drivers finish within the top 10, of course at 9th and 8th, gaining them 3 points this weekend, which could be very crucial for these midfield teams to pick up those kind of leftover points so they can fight and, it's just good to finish higher. So well done from Haas. Of course, Ferrari had the 1-2, McLaren had the 3-4. Very good from both of them. Would have liked to possibly seen Piastri finish in front of Norris just because it's his home race, but the team orders, like I said, came into play, and in the end, it all worked out for them. They get the same amount of points. The drivers get different amounts of points, but like, it doesn't matter too much. It's all going to the same corporation. So very good stuff from the Upside Down Grand Prix, the Australian Grand Prix that we had this last weekend. Again, the top 10 were Sainz, Leclerc, Norris, Piastri, Perez, Stroll, Tsunoda, Alonso, Hülkenberg, and Magnussen. Let's go ahead and talk about the Circuit of the Americas NASCAR race next. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back from the Upside Down. We are now going to go ahead and look over the NASCAR race that just happened at the Circuit of the Americas. Evidently, it is later in the day. I have a different shirt on, but it is still the same podcast. We are actually back from the Upside Down. I hope you guys caught that. If you're watching on YouTube, you definitely saw it. If you're watching on Spotify, maybe not so much. Let's go ahead and get through this NASCAR race now. All right, going into turn 1, we see Gibbs missing the corner to fall back, and Reddick went after Byron aggressively after they got out of the turn 1. After they got out of turn 1, not the turn 1. After they got out of turn 1, they went ahead, and the two of them kept going. Gibbs obviously missed the corner. He really overshot it and fell back to fight for 5th place. Gibbs and Reddick, or Byron and Reddick, then led for the rest of the first stint, the first part of the race that NASCAR does. There was a lot of contact down the back straight of lap 1 as everyone jostled for position. I really noticed this very heavily coming up as being a lot busier than Formula 1. There was a lot more to watch. I feel like there was 3 trains of cars coming down the road instead of in Formula 1 where everybody's just single file, all in one line coming down. In Circuit of the Americas specifically, it'd be the right-hand side of the track. On lap 14, we saw Ty Gibbs lock up as he came out of the pits on fresh tires. Of course, this kind of hindered him a little bit for the rest of the stage. It did hinder him because Bell ended up winning the first stage of the race. On the stage 2 restart, there was lots of potential carnage into turn 1. It was something I noticed for the first stage. Something I noticed for the second stage as well is that there's so many cars on the track that when they all go into the corner together, it doesn't really make for a good outcome, if you will. On lap 20, we see Byron overtaking Bell for the lead of the race. Keselowski made contact with Bubba Wallace, sending him around in stage 2. Unfortunate for Bubba, we did see him recover a little bit in the race, but not too much, nothing substantial there. That was kind of where he fell out of our attention a little bit. We see Larson spinning after some contact as well. That was later, kind of late in the stage, right after the middle. So a little bit later, but not too bad. Larson spinning around after he had a lockup into the corner that caused some contact. Ended up shooting him back down the field for stage 2. Kobayashi and Stenhouse also came together. We saw the replay of that. It wasn't anything too crazy. They just kind of bumped off of each other. A lot more contact that these cars can take and that they're used to racing versus Formula 1. Hamlin ended up winning stage 2. Chastain and Byron led at the stage 3 restart after exiting the first corner. They kind of took off a little bit, got a little gap for themselves. We see Chase Elliott picking up a penalty by extending the track limits through the turn 4 and 6, kind of snake back and forth series. Bell spun Kyle Busch later on. We see Byron passing Chastain for the lead with 25 to go. The leader's box during the next pit segment, Byron was leading off and Gibbs overtook Bowman on track. Byron ended up holding off Bell until the very end of the Grand Prix. The top 10, your top 10 for the Circuit of the Americas NASCAR event is as follows. Byron, Bell, Gibbs, Bowman, Reddick, Allmendinger, Chastain, Buescher, Busch, and Truex Jr. Again, that is Byron, Bell, Gibbs, Bowman, Reddick, Allmendinger, Chastain, Buescher, Busch, and Truex Jr. I don't know if I forgot to read one of those off. the first time, but hopefully I got it right the second time. Anyways, as always, thank you guys so much for coming to watch this episode. It means a lot to me. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and feel free to follow me on my socials. Of course, those will be in the description down below. Come back next week as we go over race results and key moments in the motorsport world. Until next time, don't forget to brake late and accelerate early.